Hi guys, welcome to Bengineering. In this 5-part video series, we're going to be looking at how to create this, a design for a winter-based cordial, the bottle and the logo, and we'll be covering a lot of the basic techniques as well as some more advanced stuff to do with embossing and so on. In this first video, we're going to be looking at how to create the bottle design before moving on then to looking at appearances, creating the inside shape, doing embosses, and finally renders. All right. So this series is aimed at beginners. It is relatively straightforward. Some of the bits later on get a little bit more involved, but they are optional. Things like embossing this into the lid and so on. But this should be relatively straightforward if you follow the video series. Before we get started, let's jump into Fusion. There's a couple of bits I like to do here. So the first thing we're going to do is change our preferences. So when this loads, if it loads, here we go. So I like to change this from Fusion 360 to SolidWorks, and that will allow us to orbit when we click the middle mouse button in, when we click the scroller in. I find that a little bit easier than holding Shift or whatever it is in the standard Autodesk setup. Also, the other thing that I like to change here is the reverse scroll for the zoom. Let's have a look. Here it is. So reverse zoom direction. That just means that when I scroll my mouse wheel forwards, I zoom in, and backwards for out. Just seems to make a bit more sense for me. The only other thing I would say before we get started is if any of you are new to Fusion and you don't have this installed, what you can do is either A, install it if you've got the educational license like I do, or if you've paid for it. And the other option there is you can use the online web-based version, which if you search on Google for Fusion 360 Online, you should find the web-based link for that. And that seems to work pretty good if you've got a decent internet connection and you don't necessarily need a decent PC to run it. One more thing is if you are new to this and you're not sure where to find your save files later on, what you do is you come up here to the data panel and your projects will all be listed here. So these are mine, and you'll be able to find your save files within that. All right, let's get started. So to get started, what we need to do is create a sketch that we can then revolve in order to create a shape for our bottle. So if I come up here to where it says create sketch, what it does is it shows me the different planes that exist that I can put this sketch on. So I've got showing here the front plane, which is this one, the right plane, which is this one, and the top plane, which is this one. So if I click on front over here, it centers it on the front view. So I'm going to select the front plane as the starting point for my sketch. Now, in terms of the tools we're going to use to do this, I'm going to use these basic sketching tools up here. When I created the sketch, it took me into the sketch toolbar, and these ones along the top are the most commonly used, so these will be the ones we're using the most, but we'll also use this one here, the 3-point arc. So what I'm trying to do here is create half of the shape of a bottle. So if you imagine you take a bottle and you slice it in half from the top down, we're creating effectively half of what that would look like. This will make more sense when I do it. So I'm going to create the very, very center line first. So how tall do I want this thing to be? Let's say I want this to be 200 millimeters tall. So I'm just going to come up here until it says 200. It will snap to 200 depending on how zoomed in or zoomed out you are. But what you can do if you want to is, if you want a very specific measurement, is you could use this tool here, which is the sketch dimension, and I can click on this line afterwards. And if I wanted to, I could make this, I don't know, 212 millimeters, like so, if I wanted something more specific. All right, so that's going to be effectively the center of the bottle. And what I need to do next is create the flat surface at the top, which will be the opening eventually. We'll hollow it out afterwards, but at the moment I'm just going to create it as a solid shape. So if I come along here 15 millimeters wide, that will mean that the bottle is 30 millimeters wide at the top. That's a bit wide, I think. So what I'll do is just click that, come back into this sketch dimension, and whoops, that's not the one I want. It's trying to do the angle. Let's try that again. So sketch dimension, no. Sketch dimension, this one here. So at the moment it's 15. Let's make this, I don't know, let's go 13.5 for argument's sake, just to get used to using that tool. Next, what I'm going to do is bring the neck down. Now I'm going to come all the way down to the bottom at this stage, because I can then decide how far down this line I want to start coming out. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a rectangle starting from the bottom here, and this is going to form the sort of the widest point of my bottle design. So what kind of looks right to me? Maybe something like this. All right, so what it's done is it's filled this in and filled this in. You can see now these are sort of closed shapes. The reason I've used rectangles and not just gone in and started drawing is because I can use these then as sort of corner points to create curves and shapes in the design. One thing to note with this though is even though this looks nice and narrow, looks like it's going to create a very narrow bottle, what you'll often find is that what you see in your mind at this stage, it ends up being wider in the final design. So I'll show you what I mean. Now, I'm going to finish the sketch here, and here is my sketch. I'll show you how to do this properly in a minute, but if I create a revolve, so I want to revolve this profile, this one, and this one, the axis I want to use is that. So you can see here, compared to the original blue sketch you can see here, the design obviously, because it's double the width, will end up being wider, obviously. But I just find sort of in my mind's eye, when I'm looking at this, it's quite deceiving. Things tend to look narrower than they end up being. So just bear that in mind when you're doing this. Maybe make the sketch design that you're doing a bit narrower than you think you should, because it will ultimately end up looking chunkier when it is double the width. I know it sounds obvious, but even when you're visualizing that, very often things end up wider than you think. So what I'm going to do now is come on to the sketches and right click on sketch one and edit that sketch. So that's the one we were just working on. So at any point you can come out of the sketch, right click on it and come back into the sketch if you want to do some editing. Right then, so next thing I want to do is I want to create a curvature here, and I'm going to use the arc tool, the 3-point arc tool for this. So from about maybe here up to about, let's say here. So what it is with this 3-point arc tool, you have to click the start, the end, and then choose the curvature of the arc. So I'm going to come down here until it snaps to the tangent here. So what that means is when it snaps to that tangent is the curve starts parallel to this line before coming out. Obviously you can see here there's an angle between this line and this line, but up here this one smoothly transitions into that. Now don't worry about all the extra lines that you're not going to need, because we'll use this tool up here, the trim tool, later on to get rid of those. I'll just show you what it does. If I click on a line, it will snip it away, or if I click and drag through a line, it snips it away as well. All right, but we'll come back to that later on when we're ready to finish this off. So I've created the arc here. Let's come out of this trim tool. I've created the arc here, but I also want to create a curve in this corner here and round the corners so they don't look so sharp here and here. And the tool I'm going to use for that is the fillet tool. So if I click on this and then click on this corner, what it does is it allows me to use the slider to put curvature on this corner. So 4 millimeters in this case looks about right. So what I'm also going to do is click on this corner so that they're both selected and make them both the same. So at this zoom level, it's snapping 2.5 millimeters at a time. If I zoom in, then it becomes a lot finer. So we're looking at 1/4 millimeter at a time here. So if I leave that as 4, hit enter, I'm happy with that. So this corner here, let's do the same thing. Now, because this corner was a, for want of a better word, an outie corner, and this one is an innie made by different lines, what might happen is you might not be able to select that point. As you can see, it's not snapping to that point there in my sketch. So what I'm going to do is click this curve and click this line, and you can see what it's done is it's worked out what I want to do. Now you just need to be careful when applying these, because if the end point of this fillet means that this curve comes past the start point for this fillet, so that point there, what will happen is, as you can see, if I just exaggerate it, you end up with a straight line sticking out like this, which we really don't want. So I'm going to bring this down and make sure that this fillet ends before this one begins. So you can see here, if I hover over this blue line, it actually ends here, which is great. Let's zoom out and see if it looks right. Yeah, I'm happy with that, so I'm going to hit enter. All right, so I'm pretty much done with this first stage of the bottle. The only thing I need to do now is trim away this line. So let's get the trim tool. And the other feature I want to create is the indent in the bottle, in the bottom of the bottle. So the way I'm going to do that is, there's a couple of ways you can do it. But what's important here is when this revolves, if you want a smooth curve through the center, the line, when it comes out of this center line, needs to be horizontal. What I mean by that is if I draw a little horizontal line here, which is 0.5 millimeter long, whoops, I don't want that bit, slice that away. If I have a horizontal line here, when this revolves, I'm going to have a nice smooth transition through the middle. So I'll show you what I mean. So if I get the arc tool, the 3-point arc, start from this end point, come down to about here maybe, and again, move the curve until it snaps to being parallel to this line here. This now, as this curve enters the center line, it's entering at 90 degrees to that center line. So I won't have a little point in the middle or a little indent or anything like that. This will be just a smooth curve through the center there. The other way you could do it, if you really wanted to exaggerate it, is use the circle tool and create something even more exaggerated if you wanted to, like this. And with a circle, what happens is you can see what this would look like when it's revolved, and you can see there would be a smooth curve through the center. But I think with a circle, it ends up being a little bit too over the top. So I'm going to slice that away, get rid of that and that. So this is something I'm happy with. I'm going to trim away this piece of line here and here, and this will be my finished shape. The only other thing I'm going to do is just put another fillet here. So let's go back to that tool, select that point, and drag this until we're happy. Being careful again not to have this scenario. So let's make this a lot smaller. Let's go about there. That's fine. Enter. All right. So what we've got now then is the finished profile for our bottle. Now, if you've created designs like this before using SketchUp, for example, what you would need to do at this stage in order to make this hollow shape is use the offset tool or do another set of lines to create the inside shape of the bottle, to create the hollow space. We're not going to do that because Fusion's a bit more clever, and it can do that for us later on. So I'm happy with the sketch. What I need to do now is click Finish Sketch, and I'm ready to turn this into a solid shape. So as I showed you earlier briefly, we're going to come up here to the Shell tool, and no, we're not. Cancel that. We're going to come up here to the Revolve tool, sorry, and what it's done is it's worked out that there's a profile here, and it's kind of guessed that this is the profile we want to revolve. It is. If it doesn't do that for you, what you need to do is click here on Profile and select the sketch you've just drawn. And then what it's asking is, what is the axis? So this will be the line around which it revolves it. So we need to pick this center line here. And as you can see, it's done a preview of what this will look like. So there's our sketch, and this is what it'll look like when we are finished. So we're happy with that. We want to go around 360 degrees, obviously. So we're going to click OK. So this gives us our basic bottle design. And as you can see, because I started with a tiny little horizontal line in my sketch, I've got no point in the middle of this curve here. It's a smooth curve in the bottom of the bottle. Right, so let's go front plane, Let's have a look at what we got. So the next stage then is, I know I got ahead of myself earlier on, but we need to use this shell tool now to hollow out the design. And what it does is it hollows out the interior of the design, but also it will take away whatever face you select as being the opening. I'll show you what I mean. So if I click on this, it's asking for faces/body. And when I select a face, this one here, for example, what it'll do is if I create a 5mm thickness here, it will hollow it out, but leaving this face as the opening. Now, have a look at the options over here. The direction is set to both. I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is just click on inside, because I only want the shell thickness to apply to the inside. If I had both selected, I get this extra arrow and I can add material to the outside of the design if I want to, but I'm not interested in doing that at this stage. So inside only, 5mm looks too thick, so let's change that to 4, see what that looks like. Okay, I'm happy with that. Now, you might notice, I probably should have said this earlier, that I didn't put a fillet on this outer edge when I did my sketch. There's a very deliberate reason for that, because what that does is it leaves a sharp line here so that I can select this top edge, this top face when I'm doing the shell. If I had a fillet on this edge, what would happen is when I click here, it'd also select this face here, which would give us results we don't want. So if your design doesn't allow you to click this top face, you can go back and check that that you haven't got a curve here by right-clicking on your sketch down here in the timeline and go in Edit. All right, so at any point you want to go back and change something, you can do so by right-clicking on what you did down here and going Edit. The other way of doing this, if I just come back out of the sketch, if I did have a fillet here and it was causing problems, I could come in here to the sketches and just bring those up with the drop down and go Edit Sketch here, and that would take me back into my original sketch. So if, for example, I had a curve there, like this, what you could do is take the line tool, find the start point of that curve, which it snaps to there. Yeah, draw a line out this way, draw a line down this way, till that fills in, and snip away at that. And then when you finish your sketch, what it'll do is it'll take you back to where you were, without a curve on that edge. So that's very important, is to make sure that this is a single flat face on the top of here before you do the shell. Otherwise it will cause problems. And then what we can do then is go to the fillet tool up here and select that outer edge, and we can always apply a fillet afterwards if we want to. So that's what I'm going to do in this situation, and I'm going to do the same on the inside edge as well. Oh, what have I done? Fillet. Let's put a smaller fillet on the inside. There we go. So I've filleted those two edges after I've made the 3D shape. So you can do it in the sketch, or you can do it in to the solid body once it's finished. But for the purposes of being able to shell this, it was important to not have a fillet on here before we started, because as I said, all of this would be selected. Right then, so I've got the hollow bottle. I'm ready for the next stage. I'm not going to put appearances on this yet. I'm going to do that in the next video. The only other thing I'm going to show you in this video, in this tutorial, is how to create the cork design. And what I need to be able to do is create a new sketch and create a new object in exactly the same way I created the bottle. But what you'll see is, let's just have a look. If I go to why am I in the sheet metal tools? I don't want to be in there. So if I go to create sketch, it's going to ask me where I want to do it. I want to do it on the front plane again. Now I can't see the inside edge of this bottle. I can't see if I was to draw the shape of the cork, for example. Let's say that this is what it was going to look like. If I did that, I don't know if this edge is in the right place, whether it touches the inside edge of that or not. So there's a couple of things to do here. I'm going to play around with a few options just to show you. So first thing you can do is play around with the visual style. And if I come down to this menu here, go visual style. Sorry, hang on, let me come out. What's this one say? Display settings, visual style. Shaded with hidden edges. Does that show me? I think actually where that line ends is that. Yeah, actually. So what is displaying here is the very inside edge of that fillet. So that will work for me in this sketch. I could use that corner point there. That's where that circle finishes. That tells me how wide I need to make my cork. I could also change the visual style to wireframe with hidden edges. That shows it a bit nicer. And I don't know if you can see this on the recording, but I can actually see that internal radius here as well as that internal edge. So I'm going to work with this, but if you couldn't see it and changing the visual style didn't show you where that was, there are situations where this might not be visible so easily. If, let's say, there wasn't a fillet here, if you haven't put a fillet on, that makes it harder to see it. What you can do, if I come out of my sketch, like I did before, and let's change my display settings and my visual style back to the original shaded option. What I can do is I can use this, the measure tool. So under inspect, I can do all sorts of things, but measure is really useful. And I can select that in a tube, and it tells me that the radius of that is 9.5 millimeters, which is really useful because that is the distance from the center line to the edge of this circle here. So that opening in the bottle is 19 millimeters wide, the diameter, but the radius is 9.5. So if I come back into this sketch here, let's close this. If I come back into this sketch, edit the sketch, I know using my sketch dimension tool that this distance needs to be 9.5 because I used that measurement tool to tell me. And if I change the visual style here back to shaded with hidden edges, I can see it lines up perfectly with the outer extent of that curve. So that tells me that's right. So let's center back on the front view. Let's have a look. Is this going to be suitable for a cork? I think it's a bit short. So what I'll do is, let's use the rectangle tool this time, add a bit to that. Will it snap to that edge? Yes, it will. So originally it didn't snap to that. Because I put my mouse on that corner, it suddenly realized I wanted to snap to it. And this will allow me to put extra thickness on here. And I can just do this by eye if I want, or I can use the sketch dimension tool to say, well, actually, I want to add an extra 5 millimeters to the height of this. How tall is that bit? Well, that's 8. 8 plus 5, 13. I'm happy with that. Right. Trim tool. Again, I can use that to slice away that line there so that I'm happy. Let's zoom out a bit. Will this look okay when I revolve it? Probably. Before I do, though, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put, well, I'm not going to put fillets on this time. I'm going to do a slightly different operation. I'm going to come into here and use a chamfer. So I'm going to use an equal distance chamfer, which this time, instead of putting a curve between the two lines, it's going to put an angle between them like this. So 1.25 millimeters. Will that look okay? Maybe I want this a bit bigger. So let's put that up to 2 mil. Let's do the same here, 2 millimeters. And even on the bottom of the cork itself, I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to put 2 mil, 2 mil, 2 mil, enter. And here, I'm going to put, actually, I'm going to leave that as it is. All right, so what I'm going to do before I do the final revolve, I'm going to finish the sketch and I'm going to use the drop down here under bodies just to hide the bottle design, like so. So this is the profile of the cork design. So let's go to revolve in exactly the same way we did before. Profile, it's already picked it up. Axis, we want the center line as the axis. And this is what it's going to look like. Let's go OK. So that looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. And at any point, I can turn the bottle back on to see what they look like together. I can turn the bottle off, or I can turn the cork off and leave the bottle to inspect that. All right, so for this tutorial, that's about as far as I want to go. So that's created the hollow bottle shape and the cork that goes in the top. In the next one, we'll go through how to apply appearances to this, to make this look like glass, to make this look like cork, maybe add some fancy details on here as well. All right, see you in the next one.